I'm introducing to you now Nina Mufleh. Nina is one of the founders of the online project, one of the best known digital social media agencies in the Middle East. Nina has a very unconventional presentation from what I hear. صح?
It's not too unconventional, but شغلة أنا لاحظتها إنه the most interesting parts of most of the presentations are usually at the end, the Q&A.
So you're going to go to the end?
I'm going to go to the end.
The 5-minute presentation?
I wouldn't say it's 5 minutes. It's just going to give you guys more opportunities to ask the questions.
Super.
How's the sound? Is it okay? Is it
very
too
good,
loud?
very good. احنا نسينا نزقف لك. Let's all welcome Nina Mufleh.
Do that.
Now you can start.
Thank you. One of the things صراحة غشيت أنا شوي قبل ما إجيت على الفورم وسألت زيد who are the kind of people that are going to be there? What do they know in terms of social media? And he told me that. Do I need that? I don't think so. No, I'm good without it. Thank you. He told me that almost everybody that's coming is either from the agency background or from the brand background. And I took a look at some of the brands that are here. لاحظت إنه most of us are already on the same page when it comes to social media and its importance. So I don't want to talk about any of the basics. I don't want to kind of sell you the idea of being on Facebook and being on Twitter. But I do want to take questions from you and see what it is that you want to know more about. I started off about a month ago on Twitter asking some of my followers what it is that they wanted to know in terms of social. So I've got a lot of questions prepared, but also I want you to all feel free to interrupt me along the way. If you have any questions, either tweet them to me or raise your hand and we can get to them right away. The first question that I was asked on Twitter, which is one of the things that I realize a lot of people ask when they're getting onto social media, is what's the best way to learn some of the best practices? It's a new field and there isn't really a full set structure for a lot of the things that we want to do, be it campaign-based or structure-based for long-term channels. But what we do at the online project is we always turn to some people that are a bit more experienced, that have outlook that's global and not just local. And 3 of our favorite sites that we look at are SmartBrief, Mashable, and HubSpot. Each one of them brings different values. Mashable talks about a lot of fun campaigns that are out there. HubSpot is very focused on inbound marketing, and it can give you a lot of tips and tactics and very specific techniques that you need to look at. And SmartBrief is just a great newsletter that I like to use that gives you a lot of background on industry-specific social media use. Another question, I believe one of the attendees here, I saw her from a distance but didn't get a chance to interact with her yet, was asking about the best applications to use on Facebook. There are so many applications that are out there, some that are for free and some that are premium that we've experimented with. And there isn't really an answer as to the best applications. It really depends on what it is that you're trying to do, the use that you're trying to find for them. But 2 of my favorites are Expion and Wildfire. Expion is a social media management system, and it's one of many that are out there. We use it at the online project to pre-schedule content on Facebook. We use it to measure the impact of the content that we're putting out there. It has a very good back-end and analytics system that we can take a look at. And Wildfire is basically a multi-use kind of application. They have a lot of ready-made sweepstakes that already exist that you could just plug in. There's a similar company, I couldn't find their logo to put on there though, but it's called Joe Viral. And they're a great local homegrown company that you can use to build your applications for you at very cost-effective prices. Did I see a hand go up over there? Oh, okay. Like I said, feel free to interrupt me.
Let me understand the format. So let me just repeat so that the people who just came in. You want to go through this presentation, answering questions you got on Twitter.
Exactly.
And then getting comments on the fly.
Getting comments, getting more questions, whatever you guys want to know about social media.
You're going to need me because I move questions out of them.
You would?
Okay? If you want them to ask questions, you're going to have to go a bit slower. Either I'm going to have to stop and ask them if they want questions, or you're going to have to look at them and say, anybody have questions? And give them like...
Anybody have questions?
Give them the 20-second question thinking mode like this, Anybody have questions?
Zaid, you're not helping. All right. The suspense of this question you were saying. How do I get verified on Twitter? I think this is something a lot of people want to know. Verification is one of those kind of coveted checks that everybody wants on Twitter. In the initial phases of Twitter, there was a a kind of system where you would just apply for verification and they would approve it based on if you were popular enough, if there was the assumption that enough people were going to be kind of pretending to be you. Halla, Twitter is using a bit of a different formula. Basically, if you're an advertiser or a partner, somebody that's willing to spend money on the platform, they are going to be giving you verification. What we found out recently, though, we were very excited when we found out that was the method because a lot of our clients use advertising, and so it was quick for us to get verification for a lot of them. But what we found out recently is that Twitter actually wants to stop advertising internationally until they figure out a more cost-effective formula for them. And so I think at the end of next month, they're going to stop all international verification processes and advertising. The advertising amounts. So they don't really have a set amount, but what you can do is you can use the same system that's used on most online platforms, Facebook, Google. It's a bidding system, basically. But the minimum is around $15,000 that they recommend you start a campaign with.
Okay, and we have till the end of this month or this year?
Pretty much. So I'm not sure exactly when their cutoff is going to be, but the information we received yesterday is that they are going to stop taking insertion orders or orders for advertising on Twitter very, very soon. And by the end of the year, all the international campaigns looks like it's going to be stopped.
Thank you. On another note or another comment, you can verify people if they are into government. There
are still exceptions, but I think what Twitter has done is they've realized that one of their potential revenue streams is the verification. So the way that they're doing that is just they're tying it closer to the advertising platform.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions about Twitter and verification?
Twitter and verification, yeah. Our friend from
I'm Amal Masri. I'm from Palestine Business Focus magazine. It's a simple question, has nothing to do directly with the verification, but many companies are very concerned about the frequency of tweeting. For example, we put Twitter for a certain company or a certain brand, so some people just hesitate, say we have to have someone who all the time, sends messages, tweets, replies to what other people tweet. So this is a main concern. If you can just shed a small light on it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So there are basically two parts to that question, is how often should you tweet and how many resources do you have to have dedicated to responding to people. When it comes to how often you should tweet, the basic rule of thumb, the kind of sweet number on Twitter is you can do anything between 15 and 20 tweets a day before you start irritating your followers. But it all depends on the actual content that you're tweeting, whether it adds value to your followers, whether it's in line with what their expectations are, and mainly what other people in the industry are doing. So the 15 to 20 tweet rule is a very generic one. I think each person needs to look at what it is that they can say and how they can offer value and see something that is more in line with them. The second part of the question had to do with dedicating resources for actually responding to people. And that's something that we're in the consumer industry. So most of our brands are business-to-consumer products. And we have a lot of people that either get very angry or very happy. It's usually two sets of extremes of reactions that we have to deal with. And what we've realized is the quicker you are to respond to a tweet, if it's a very negative or a very positive tweet, the quicker you can kind of amplify the positive and convert the negative. So we have a team of 24-hour moderators that are basically looking at all the content that's coming through to our channels and making sure that if there's anything that needs urgent attention, we can give it to them right away.
Okay, hi. It's a generic question, but again, it's about measurement. If we want to use Twitter as an example, how do you measure your social media? I mean, there's a cloud score, there's Twitter counters, but I mean, is there a credible, actually, business-oriented measurement for your social media activities or presence?
It really depends what it is that you're trying to measure. So if you could tell me a little bit more about your specific challenge, maybe I could get into that.
Let's say that I have a campaign in Facebook or Twitter. How do you measure actually your reach, your influence, or the return on investment that you put to actually launch that campaign?
Okay.
Maybe the number of followers, maybe the number of engaged people. How do you measure actually any social media activity that you've made or campaign?
There is a lot of data out there, and it becomes very difficult sometimes to decide what to look at and what the right data set is to look at for each campaign. There are the basic measurements that you can look at, the number of followers, the number of fans that you've got on Facebook. But what I found is that it's more important to actually measure your reach. So when you're publishing content, how are people reacting to that content? With Facebook, you can go into the insights of any page, and you can see exactly how far it goes between your fans and their friends and the exact reach that it's got there. And on Twitter, you mentioned something like clout. That's really great in telling you how much your amplification scores are and how far your message is actually spreading. So it's important to see when you say something, is somebody retweeting it? Are their followers engaging with it as well? And how far it's actually going. And sometimes the kind of depth that you want to go into isn't really relevant to your campaign. So you want to see as well in terms of what it is that you're trying to do there, how much those metrics kind of match up.
And Nina, move on to the next slide, okay?
All right, so one of the things that a lot of people want to know is if they're advertising correctly on Facebook. We took a look at some regional numbers, and we took a look at some global numbers as well. And what we mainly use Facebook for is growing a follower base. So we look at the click-through rates of the ads that we're doing, and we looked at the cost per fans. And when we compared them to the US at first, we were very shocked with the numbers that we were getting. So in the US, I think the average cost per fan was around $2.50 to $3, depending on a campaign. And then when we were looking at more local campaigns here, we were averaging around 7 to 15 cents, depending on the campaign. So it's a very, very big difference. And so we started looking at regional numbers and different brands and testing how we were doing compared to them. And what we realized is that the two initial metrics that we look at are click-through rates and cost per fan. But what is more important to actually measure is the quality of the conversations on your community or within your community after you do an advertising campaign. Sometimes a lot of people will see an ad, they'll notice a familiar logo, they'll click on it, they'll join your community. But بعدين what's going to happen is they're going to be irrelevant fans. They're not there to participate in the conversations that you want to have. So in order to know if you're having a good campaign on Facebook or not, you need to really pay attention to the quality of the conversations and how the community is shaping up after that. This is one of my favorite questions, is how much does social media marketing actually cost? There is this theory out there that Facebook is for free and Twitter is for free and everybody can actually use it for free, which is absolutely true. They're utilities in a way. But at the same time, what we've looked at is some best practices of big corporations and how much it actually costs for them to run social media campaigns in there. So there's research by a company called the Altimeter Group. And what they said is that the average corporate social media channel requires this many people in terms of human resources. And if you add up your human resources and think of them as your initial cost, that's how much the starting of a campaign is going to cost you. So we're looking at least one strategist, 2 social media managers, 3 community managers, a social analyst, a web developer, and a branding person that knows how to adapt things for the platforms that they're working on. And then at least one part-timer who they consider the education manager, somebody who's making sure that everybody in all the other departments is learning about social media and seeing the impact it has on the organization. And then 1 or 2 business liaisons to coordinate with other units. So this is the structure that they recommend for big corporations and how they should use social media. I think for startups, it's a little bit different. You can kind of mesh all these people into 1 or 2 or 3 people. I always recommend that startups actually look at doing it in-house for a number of reasons. One, it's much more cost-effective when you're a very, very small team. When you're not entirely sure of what it is that you want to do on Facebook or on Twitter or any social platforms. But it's also because there's some sort of energy that happens in startups where you're very hungry for interacting with your consumers, getting their direct feedback. It's not just about marketing campaigns, Watiha. It's actually about looking at all the kind of return on engagement. And rather than having that filtered through an agency or outsourcing it, when you're the startup and you're the actual team involved, I think it's very good to have that direct contact with your consumers. Yes?
Okay, we have a question, comment on this. Wait a minute, I'll give you the microphone. صوتك عالي بس يعني just for everyone else.
Just a quick question. What is community manager? If you go back on slide, community.
Okay, so community managers, that's a very common term that we use in the social media industry for anybody that's actually managing your community. Our community managers are available almost all day long to communicate with the fans if there are any questions or concerns that they have. The community managers are there to interact with them and talk to them. And furthermore, the community managers are the ones that know the fans the best. So they're the ones that are also coming up with the different kind of strategies for, should we do offline events for them? Should we do tweet ups? Should we do campaigns? They're the ones that are really pushing it forward.
Any other questions before she moves on to her next slide? Yeah. You can walk around, Nina, if you want.
Don't you think such an approach from an economy of scale would cause a problem? Like if you have so many clients, so many fans, having people checking what they write and send it to the right department and reply back, don't you think from an economy of scale this is not feasible?
How would you see it as not feasible exactly from an economic scale?
I'll give you an example. Let's take a mobile operator. If we have about 6 million mobile users in Jordan, say 1% of those tweeting or sending comments on Facebook, how many agents do you want in the back? Basically what you guys are trying to do is replacing a call center in a more, from a social network perspective.
I wouldn't say we're replacing call centers, but I'd say we're facilitating conversations for people when and where they want to have them. So sometimes you've got people, especially in the younger generations, that don't necessarily want to call through to a call center, wait until their call is answered, figure out the problem, and then get back to them. They just rather tweet it or Facebook it and get it facilitated. So what we do is we integrate with the call centers. One of our first clients was Zain, one of the biggest telecommunication brands in Jordan, and we now work with them on a regional scale. And what we found is that to try to mimic the impact of their call center is actually going to slow us down and slow down their operation. But when we can integrate with their call center and in the future hopefully teach all their call center team to answer through social media, that's where we're speeding up the process. And that's where you can start to see some return on investment as well. So we know some companies actually calculate how much each cost of a phone call to the call center is. And I've heard it range between $10 and $15 depending on the company. If we can actually solve these problems faster through social media, then you've got an immediate return on social investment.
But how would you do that manually? I mean, with a community manager, with people checking the tweets and filtering them, sending them back to the proper department. You're basically just manually doing so. From an economy scale is not.
It's manual in the sense that there's human interaction behind it, but at the same time we use enterprise software to speed up the process. So one of the tools that I mentioned earlier is Expion. It's a social media management software that automatically filters and types certain types of content and sends them to the right party. So you've got the community manager that's making sure everything's being responded to, but you also have the automation of the software that's making sure it gets there as fast as possible and to the relevant person. This is why I think when we're talking, sorry, Zaid, this is why I think when we're talking about startups versus multinational companies, the approach needs to be very, very different. It's not just about learning the do's and don'ts of the basic stuff on social media. It's about learning how to properly integrate it with your system so you're making yourself more efficient, not taking 2 steps back. How are we doing on time? Yeah. All right, so a lot of people seem to be very obsessed with the idea of measurement, and this has to do with content, which we touched on earlier. So how do you measure the success of your content? Again, it's all about the reach. You take a look at the metrics like the likes and the comments, how much you're getting in terms of quantity. But then you have to also look at the relevance and the sentiment, which gives you an indication of the quality of your reach. So this is just an example of one of the status updates that we've published through one of our clients. But you take a look and you see 196 people like it and 86 people have commented on it. And 252 people are talking about it and 16,000 people plus is what it's reached to. So these all look like great numbers, but what you need to do is peel back a layer and also see, are they relevant conversations? So if this is Nescafe Arabia that's talking, if somebody's coming in and talking about something that's not coffee related or not related to the question itself, are we doing something right or are we doing something wrong? What we do is we measure all the sentiments per post, per interaction that we have, and we measure the relevance as well to make sure that we're kind of in the right ballpark. And this is one of my favorites. Are there any industries that people shouldn't engage through social media on? Again, turning to some research from the Altimeter group, they took a look at the industries that are kind of doing best on social media on a global scale. And what they found is that the less restrictions there are on the industry, the better they are on social media. And we've worked with clients from all sorts of different industries, and we've had our successes in a variety of ways. But I can definitely sympathize with what they're saying. So rating them from the best to not so best, the Altimeter group looks at the industries like retail as one of the tops, then consumer products, the automotive industry, then regulated industries like banking, and finally luxury hotels. There are definitely exceptions to this scale. Looking locally, I remember the Four Seasons, when they first launched, I thought that's going to be quite a challenge for them. But they seem to be handling the Facebook and Twitter market very, very well. So I don't think they necessarily fit right into this index that the Altimeter came up with. But I can definitely see from the experience that we've had, retail and FMCGs tend to be some of the top and best adopted kind of brands. And the takeaway from them is that the industries with communication limitations end up doing worse. So this is for all the agencies out there, ourselves included. Anybody that's trying to get brands to have the quick wins on social media, it's a lot easier to look at the brands that have the best interactions offline and have the most kind of access to their consumers without any restrictions to get started with. Now, somebody was also asking about listening to the crowd and how to engage in conversations. And what that basically boils down to is search. And there are different ways that you can search for relevant conversations. There are tools like Google Alerts that you can see what's actually happening in the entire web sphere. And then there are more specific listening tools that can pull up social media conversations for you. I'm a big fan of tools like Radian 6, Alterian, and there's Meltwater Buzz, which is a new one that collects Arabic conversations on the social web as well. And you can actually filter those to see exactly which countries are having conversations about your brand and your competitors as well. So you can measure your share of voice, you can see who's talking about, you can see who's having problems with your competitors, and you can actually use that as a kind of sales lead. So you jump into a conversation where somebody's not so happy with a competitor and you offer them the service as well. And they see that you're using social media to reach out to them, and that's usually a very good way to show somebody that you're listening to a conversation and you're not there to just sell, but you're there to help them as well. Does anybody have any questions?
Any question or comment
tools?
on that? On the social media conversation?
Oh.
Let's go with Ahmed for a minute. Yeah.
So I had personally some interesting situations. I'm talking now as a consumer, by the way.
Okay.
So don't worry. Situations, I mean, two stories, but similar, I mean, in structure. Basically, somebody having a problem with a Jordanian company, with a product or service, with a Jordanian kind of representative, wakale, okay, for a foreign brand, complaining in person and so on, not getting a result, and then putting it on Twitter or on Facebook, and then immediately getting a result from the head office of that brand. So this happened to me personally, and it was amazing actually how it was a complaint about a product, and I saw the trail of emails, how it triggered something in the US, and they contacted the European office, and then they contacted the Middle Eastern office, and the same shopkeeper who didn't want to give me a replacement, actually ended up giving me a replacement. So, how do you see this? I mean, this whole discrepancy between how companies in Jordan deal with customer complaints that comes through social media or through just normal word of mouth, and the reaction that you get from because you work with multinationals and so on. So let's say I buy a Nescafe, okay, and something like this comes up.
I think it's incredible that social media is now giving us the opportunity to democratize conversations. So there are a lot of things that we don't know about the way customer complaints are handled in Jordan in general versus the way they're handled globally. But one of the things that we do know is that it tends to be very frustrating when we're trying to get a problem solved and we keep on calling the numbers and nobody's answering, or they keep on shuffling us to somebody else. But once a company is on social media, they're on Facebook or they're on Twitter, the people behind that decision are usually very conscious of the fact that somebody else is looking. So whereas before, as the customer care representative, I was dealing with Ahmed directly. If he pissed me off a little bit, I could kind of push him to the side and say, you know what, you're not getting what you want. But halla, I'm no longer accountable just to him. I'm accountable to him and his followers and all of my followers as well. So it puts a little bit of accountability and pressure on the companies themselves. And I think it raises the standards for how they interact with people. And personally, that's what excites me most about what we do as well, because we're seeing this shift in culture with the way companies are dealing with their consumers. They're becoming a lot more accessible. The companies that were already accessible are increasing that even more, and they're doing more with their customers. And they're being social. They're integrating in a way that they weren't before.
Any other question or comment? You have several. How many of these left? Do you have like 3 or 4 or 5?
Well, we can go on forever.
Oh, really?
So
Okay,
if there are more questions, I'd rather take them from the audience,
Okay,
and then I'll get back to the
very
people
good
on
idea,
Twitter
by the
separately.
way, just picking up all the questions you got. Okay, we'll just get one
over
comment,
there.
and then she'll go to her next question. We'll do 2 more questions, I think.
Perfect.
And then we'll see if anybody has extra comments. Yeah, okay.
We've been having this debate in my company, which is the engagement language, which we should basically start with our fans on Facebook and Twitter. When it comes to English, it's not a problem. However, when it comes to Arabic, we have this debate whether we should use the classical Arabic or the modern everyday Arabic. So do you have any recommendation for regional brands of the kind of language when it comes to Arabic they should use with their fans? Especially some fans, they use classical Arabic, but mostly they use the modern everyday one. So what's your recommendation for that?
It's very challenging when it comes to Arabic. When it comes to English, it's kind of easy to be relevant to somebody, an audience member in the UK versus an audience member in the US. The differences between the English language are so subtle there that it's easy to appeal to them all. When it comes to Arabic, the more formal, classical, white label Arabic is something that would appeal to a bigger general audience. But at the same time, it seems kind of rigid on social media. So there's always this kind of balance, this dance and song that we try to play with ourselves of finding the right formula. And it varies from community to community. So at one point, when we were handling the UNICEF community, that was very easy for us to make that decision because it was more formal by nature. The way that UNICEF communicates, it's a UN organization, it's very formal, it's kind of press releasey in its language. But now we're dealing with something like Nescafe, for example, and it's Nescafe Arabia. Finding the right balance is very challenging. But one of the starting steps you can take is to look at exactly where your fan base is coming from. Who are the majority people that are dominating your fan page? If you see that they're mostly from the Levant, then you can lump them up in one way. If you see they're mostly from the Gulf, then your language kind of changes that way as well. So it's very important to always look at the analytics and see where people are coming from, and then test the different kind of content. See when you put it out there, are people reacting well to it or not? And then try to make some assumptions based off of that.
Okay. You can move on to your next question, I think.
Thank you.
Then we'll take a comment in a minute.
حاسة زيد مدير المدرسة.
شفت. لأني التخمت أنا بالفورمات هذا تبع البرزنتيشن.
Is it okay?
I'm enjoying it.
Thank you.
I think everybody is. It's interesting, huh? يلا, okay.
طيب, so the next question, all right, we kind of just touched on this anyways right now, is Arabic content. There's something separate to the Arabic conversation that I wanted to talk about. When we first started managing Facebook, we could actually see the analytics of our fans and what language they were using Facebook in. So we made a very poor judgment call then, and we made a very bad assumption. About 2 years ago, Facebook forced everybody into the Arabic interface. And what we found interesting was that about 75% of the Facebook users opted back into the English interface. So we assumed that most people were actually more comfortable with English, therefore we would communicate with our fans in English. بس بعدين لاحظنا إنه they were more comfortable with the interface in English, which had nothing to do with the content that they'd be consuming. They were comfortable knowing that the sign-in was on the right and didn't want it switched to the left. They were comfortable knowing exactly where the poke was and what it meant. But when you're trying to have conversations that are a bit more advanced than just submit and enter, they were actually much, much more comfortable and reacted much better when we switched the conversation to Arabic. So that's something that I would advise to most brands, is that if you are trying to localize a conversation, localize it. Actually look at the conversations that people are having and the language that they're having it in. And if it's in Arabic, then you definitely need to make the switch to that. And most of you can probably answer this question blindly. How do I know when I'm ready to launch my Facebook page? There is a very basic checklist that we've put together. And basically, you have to answer a few questions for yourself. The first one is, do you know what you're using it for? So if you've got the design and the structure ready, but you're not entirely sure what you're going to be doing there, that's a bit of a dangerous situation that you're putting yourself in. Do you have the resources to manage it? Do you have somebody that's actually going to be able to look at the questions? It can be you, it can be a colleague, but as long as you've got somebody that knows it's their responsibility to go in, identify the questions and respond to them, you need to make sure that person's there and available. And then, is the structure ready? Are you designed well for the social channels? Is your thumbnail optimized for how people are going to see it in their feeds? Is the structure, everything that's on your website, actually available on your social media channels as well? And do you know what it is that you're going to say? We have a content team that actually puts together a lot of the content in advance. Just because a lot of times when you're caught off guard and you don't exactly have something to say, you're not planning for it, you end up quiet for a very long period of time. And that's one of the dangers of getting on social media, getting very excited. And then 2-3 weeks later, you kind of run out of things to say or you don't know what it is that you're going to say. So we recommend pre-planning it. And then asking yourself if you're actually offering something special to your community there. What is it that they are there to connect with you for? Make sure you're giving them that. A lot of times we get caught up in the excitement of we need to get a fan page up there or a Twitter channel. Uminsa inna, we're actually dealing with human beings and we need to offer them something that not just they're expecting, but something special to thank them for the time that they're using to connect with us. And I'm going to take a couple of last comments on this. There's one over here, right? Okay, we'll come to you, Batul. The gentleman here, then Batul.
Nina, question. You talked about converting or engaging in Arabic. It's a quick question. What do you recommend when replying بالعربي, in Arabic? Okay, what do you recommend to totally translate the reply to Arabic? Because some words, if you translate it to the Arabic, tweets, it's going to be المغردين. Tweets, it's going to be تغريدات. So it's going to sound funny, مغردين. So what do you recommend, to actually reply totally in Arabic or use this language that's like 3 for the عين and 7 tweetat, يعني ممكن نسميهم tweetat instead of مغردين وتغريدات. What do you recommend when replying in Arabic?
It really depends on the brand that we're talking about. Yani for some brands, it's really inappropriate for them to suddenly start using Arabizi and the tweetat and all that. And for other brands, it's more authentic. It's part of who they are. مثلا Play 99.6 is a radio station, part of our sister company. They appeal to a very young audience. They're very casual in the way they speak on the radio. It makes a lot of sense for them to be talking in the Arabizi kind of approach. But it wouldn't make sense for a bank to be doing that as well. It kind of looks wrong. So my recommendation would be the Facebook approach. When Facebook wanted to actually translate all its websites and localize it and Arabize it, they went to the crowd and they let the crowd dictate what a poke would mean and what sign-in should mean and all that. Some of the things might sound weird to me and you, but it was actually based on the consumers and what habits they have and what words they use the most. So when you're coming to reply to somebody, try to figure out what language they're most comfortable in. And by language, I don't mean Arabic or English, but the actual subtleties of the language.
Hi, Nina. Wasim from Nielsen Company. I understand that we're talking about social media, Facebook and Twitter, but I'm still wondering why no one spoke about blogs, forums, discussion boards, or anything else. Where do you guys stand in this? What do you guys do?
Okay,
because we're only looking at Facebook and Twitter.
We're only looking, well, I wouldn't say we're only looking at Facebook and Twitter. We definitely encourage people to be as social as possible across multiple platforms. The one that seems to be getting most people's excitement these days happen to be the top social networks. But it's like you said, these are just networks. There are definitely other social media platforms that are out there. When it comes to blogging, those are great opportunities that people have as companies or as individuals to establish thought leadership. If we're talking about an Islamic banking institution, for example, and they started a blog where they were talking on a very high strategic level to their peers, that's a great opportunity that they have through the internet that they wouldn't have pre-social channels. So I think those are definitely opportunities that everybody needs to look into and see which ones apply to them the most. Okay. And the thing about, sorry. Oh.
Yeah, go. If you want to wrap up, just...
yeah, I was going to say, the thing about social channels and social networks and social tools is that there are so many out there that there's no right or wrong answer. It's just which one applies to your brand and to your objectives, more importantly. So what is it that you're trying to do, and which one of these tools can help you? Because being on Facebook and being on Twitter, being on a blog or having a blog, it's not a strategy in itself. Those are just tools that are going to help you get places.
Does social media affect consumer behavior towards specific services? Let's say الموبايل companies عندنا بجوردن, and I'm doing my thesis on this وعم بشوف إيش ممكن إشي يساعدني فيها. Thank you.
Could you just repeat the question for me? I'm not sure I got it.
Does social media affect consumer behavior toward the services الموبايل companies عندنا?
So I haven't seen any local or regional research, but what I have seen is that most people that are likely to connect with a brand on social media are, I think it was 5 to 7 times more likely to purchase from that brand. And don't quote me on that number because I'm not entirely sure. But there is research out there that says there are definite business cases for why you want to connect with a bigger audience. لأنه it's just going to bring you those kind of connections.
All right. Well, I think that kind of covers it. Interesting format.
I saw that there were a lot of questions that came through on Twitter, so I'm going to do my best to get you the answers today, if possible.
And Nina is also available at all times, through her Twitter channel, and you can all follow her. Thank you very much, Nina Mufleh of the Online Project, for an interesting and engaging system.
Anytime. Thanks,
Interesting, very interesting.